this morning. But again, it's so great to be with you all. Today is actually part 3 of our Transformative SEL series. So we're really excited. Thanks so much for joining us, for being here, for spending part of your Thursday morning in this kind of final series of our workshop. I'm going to go ahead and just pull up a few slides for us, and we'll begin to move through our content for today's session. But I would love to just hear from folks in the chat if anyone was with us last week for part 2 was myself and Elaine Porcher, or maybe even part 1 with Erica and Elaine. I'd love just to kind of see if folks were able to be in any of those other parts of the conversation on Transformative SEL. Going to get my chat box up here so I can see. Oh, that's awesome. I love that there are some folks who've been here. That's great. Awesome. Well, welcome back. Welcome back to all of you. And for those who weren't with us, so glad to have you. So glad to have you. We've been talking about self-awareness as adults in this work with young people. Last week was kind of a deep dive into guiding questions for educators, right? Kind of related to transformative SEL. And today we're going to be going a little bit further into kind of how do we co-create expansive and inclusive classrooms, programs, really school systems at the macro level. When we're thinking about equity, when we're thinking about transformative SEL, what does that kind of look like? How are we kind of taking some of these ideas and beginning to implement them into our work? And it's really great. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat box from last week. So again, thank you for joining us for part 3. Again, I'm Stephanie, Steph. A lot of people call me Stolzy at the Leadership Program, so feel free. I'm, again, the Director of Clinical Services, and I have a background in social work and also in higher education. So a lot of my work is for the company, really thinking about transformative SEL, really how are we moving away from Eurocentric models of SEL into really moving towards a place of really justice in our schools and in our programs, really seeing our young people, really seeing one another in the work that we do, and really supporting our students and our staff members. So again, it's a pleasure to be with all of you. This is our plan for today. We're going to quickly kind of review transformative SEL. We're going to really start with self. We're going to think a little bit about our own journey as students, as young people. We're going to think about frameworks, right? Kind of these broad stroke frameworks that can allow more expansive and more inclusive spaces for students. And then lastly, thinking about strategies and ways to really apply these frameworks in our work, right? Or in our, again, like we were saying last week, kind of in our staff meetings, whatever our kind of sphere of influence might be, whether we're really student facing, more staff facing, if we're kind of more in managerial or leadership positions. But regardless of your audience, this topic is so applicable and it's so pertinent now more than ever as we're going to kind of move through some of our content for today. I wanted to ground us a little bit in this poem, which I'm sure many folks on the call have seen or heard. It's one of our favorites at the Leadership Program when we talk about topics like equity, racial justice, healing, mental health, culturally responsive curriculum, things like that. And so I wanted just to go ahead and read this for our group today and allow some thoughts or reactions. We also really love utilizing this poem with young people as we create programming, as we kind of have our first early sessions in terms of setting up clubs and programs. And this comes from the amazing activist, Mickey Scott Bay Jones, who did a lot of work actually back in 2016 after the presidential election at that time. So here we go, invitation to brave space. And let me know kind of what's resonating for you all this morning as I read this. Together, we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we all have caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together. And we will work on it side by side. So again, this is just kind of to ground us a little bit in our conversation. And I would love if folks are comfortable in the chat, if there's like a word or a phrase or something that's kind of resonating with you all this morning, we'd love to read what's coming up for you. As we think about brave space and kind of having these courageous conversations around inclusivity, right, and around equity. So I'll just give folks a couple minutes, let that sink in. And again, just an invitation to share if you're feeling that this morning. I know it's still a little bit early in our workday for many of us. You know, for myself, each time I read it, it's a little different, you know, kind of different things stand out. And I'm seeing here from Nigel, thank you so much. That brave space is healthy communication to me, right? Freedom to speak your truth without judgment. Thank you for that. Right, thinking about healthy communication, right? Non-judgmental, right? Really trying to kind of engage mindfully with one another in the freedom to speak our truth without judgment, right? Knowing that it's not going to be perfect. Oftentimes these conversations can feel a little bit messy or a little bit muddled. Marissa, thank you. I think it resonates with me because it's okay to make mistakes. Absolutely, no one is perfect, but we all still have to try to make that space for each other. Absolutely, and especially coming to these conversations with multiple identities, different lived experiences, and then what that means also when we're creating spaces for our students who also occupy different identities, maybe from each other or from ourselves and our students. So how we were kind of thinking about creating that brave space where we're creating a sense of inclusion and belonging, right? So thank you, everyone. And Vance, similar to Marissa, for me, what resonates is that idea that one is welcome as they are. It's not supposed to look a certain way. I love that. That's really powerful. Come as you are, right? And let's just kind of begin to move through some deep conversation, building relationships with each other. And it's not going to be perfect, right? It's not supposed to look a certain way. Thank you for that. Just to kind of move into our workshop quote as well for this morning. This is one of my favorites, and it comes from an African proverb, which is this: the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. I'm sure this also is familiar for folks on the call this morning. I chose this in particular for today as we're thinking about creating environments, right? Creating spaces where young people feel that they belong, or they feel that they're included, that they've been thought about in the creation of the space, right? And Odalise, thank you. Just understanding that we are all human, right? Which means we aren't perfect. We will come as we come. We need to love and accept each other and create the comfort with each other that we may not find other places. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely, absolutely. And when we think about our spaces, our programming, our schools, our school districts, right? And then kind of in relation to this particular quote, I'd love to offer, again, just any thoughts or reactions that you may have to what's being shared here, right? Thinking about this notion of the village, right? In our schools and in our programs, in young people who don't feel that they belong, who don't feel that they're valued or visible in that space, what are some of those behaviors that we sometimes see, right? And what's underneath that behavior? I think for me, when I work with teachers and I work with other social workers, it's really important to consider whatever behavior that's maybe being, talked about, or adults are kind of worrying about, what's driving that behavior. And I think a lot of the time it's a lack of connection or relationship, oftentimes, not fully being seen sometimes in whatever space that child is occupying. So I hope it's just something we'll kind of keep in our mind as we move forward in our conversation this morning, and something that we can go back to even after today's session. So again, a really quick kind of overview here. I don't want to belabor this. I know we've been talking about this for a few weeks together, but we're thinking again about our 5 competencies of social and emotional learning, and that transformative piece that CASEL has really been highlighting and driving forward. If you're familiar with CASEL, kind of a national organization that's really focused on social and emotional learning in different school districts across the nation. So it's a really great resource. They have great blog posts and articles. And I encourage you all, if you haven't kind of checked it out yet, that maybe that might be a place to look into after today. And again, we have the wheel of SEL, of social and emotional learning, with, again, our self-awareness, our self-management competencies that we were really unpacking last week. And then social awareness, right? Relationship skills. And then lastly, our responsible decision-making. And all around that, we have our other really important factors, right? We're thinking about classrooms, right? Our curriculum and instruction. We're thinking about our actual school setting, our school environment, right? And within that, we have different practices and different policies that impact our students. And then we have, lastly, that homes and communities layer, right? Thinking about family and community partnerships in relation to SEL, right? And so as we touched upon last week, SEL that's transformative is really a process by which young people and adults, right, really centering adults in this work, these conversations, really build strong and respectful, lasting relationships together, right, that facilitate a co-learning that allows for a critical examination of things like the root causes of inequity, and kind of coming together to collaborate on solutions that lead to personal, community, and also societal well-being. Traditionally, a lot of our SEL programs have just focused on the student, the individual, a lot of focus just on kind of this person, right? Without considering context. So you'll see in this first infographic, that big purple circle is like a laser focus, a lot of time and energy on the young person, a little bit of time on classroom factors and school and system factors and societal context. And now as we widen our lens to transformative SEL, you'll see in the larger circle that the layers are more equitable, right? They're more equal in terms of what is being looked at, what is given time and attention towards. And I think really there's more balance there, right? As a social worker, we never just look at our student. We're looking at the student in their environment. And that's really what we're moving towards largely in transformative SEL as well, as person in environment, really considering how the classroom, the school, and greater society is impacting on our student, right? Because no one exists in a vacuum. We're all, impacted by so many different things. And so as we talked about last week, we had our different competencies and then some examples to really deepen, widen the SEL lens for, again, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So I won't go in depth to all of those, but it's just kind of a nice slide to have that you'll get emailed after today, just to kind of remind yourself and maybe even bring these conversations into staff meetings, right? And kind of thinking about and again, expanding the work after our workshop is over. We also touched on our transformative guiding questions that can also just be really amazing conversation generators, as we experienced together last week, right? And thinking about how these are questions where we can really have, maybe some brave conversation, right? That brave space, those courageous conversations with other staff members, other teachers, youth development workers, you name it. So we hope that that can continue to be useful to all of you as we move forward in this powerful work. And our kind of essential question for today, again, is how are we really creating environments for our students to thrive, right? Not just survive. I've been so impacted and so inspired by the book on the left by the amazing Bettina Love. I love to see in the chat if folks have like read this book or heard about this book. This is a big one that Danny and I actually read. Oh my goodness, Danny, was that like a year and a half ago or so in one of our working groups within the Leadership Program. And it has been really, again, transformational, I think, for how we approach our work. This is the book called We Want to Do More Than Survive, that touches on abolitionist teaching in the pursuit of educational freedom. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, awesome, Vance and Vandisha, thank you. Some have read it, some are gonna read it, and just might be a great one maybe for your reading list. And to also read it as a staff could be really powerful and have like a mini book club potentially. Bettina Love talks a lot about, again, like her title shares here, having our young people not just survive, but really thrive. And she quotes bell hooks in her book here. And so I know this might be familiar for some of us on the call. When bell hooks has defined a home place. And so I'm going to read to you here this description that comes from Bettina Love's book. Described by bell hooks, a home place is a space where Black folks truly matter to each other, where souls are nurtured, comforted, and fed. Home place is a community, typically led by women, where white power and the damages done by it are healed by loving Blackness and restoring dignity. She argues that home place is a site of resistance. Understanding the gutting of dark communities, home places, is critical to a teacher's analysis of the community in which he or she teaches. I understand my own positionality as a white identified social worker in this moment with all of you this morning. And again, thinking about this concept of home place. I just wanted to kind of start with all of you today. Have you felt in your own adolescence a home place? Whether that was at school with a certain teacher, or that was a certain club or program that you were involved in, where you felt really valued in your identities. Again, we're really centering Black folks in this particular moment. But I am curious, if we haven't experienced one, have we worked to create home places for our young people? And just kind of living in that question a little bit of reflection this morning, thinking again about home place really equaling an environment where our students are thriving. And so Bettina Love talks a lot about growing up in Rochester and having home places herself, where she felt really connected, especially with her civics engagement club. That I can't recall the name of right in this moment. Forgive me for folks who've read it. Maybe you can remember her program that she talks so much about in her book. And then thinking about her own work as a teacher outside of Miami in Florida, and how she worked so intentionally to create home places for her students, particularly her Black and brown students who weren't really feeling in society or within maybe the greater school community that sense of belonging or inclusion. So I thought this was just a really important question for us to consider as we think about ourselves and our own upbringing, our own moments of feeling included and a sense of belonging. Or maybe there's some painful memories there too, which I want to acknowledge and validate if we did not feel that we had a home place. But maybe now as an adult, we can really work to create those things for our students. My plan for today is to kind of unpack this essential guiding principles for equitable whole child design wheel. This comes from Sold Practice Principles, and it's a really helpful kind of infographic to unpack kind of the 5 buckets or 5 ways to currently assess where we're at in providing equitable programming, and also where we want to move towards, kind of like what's going well, and oh my goodness, there's some gaps, right? Like maybe we have to really focus our attention a little bit more on integrated support systems, for example. So while these are kind of more large ideas and concepts, my hope is that we'll go through a few and then we'll unpack together what that's looking like for you all. And what's kind of, I think, beautiful is that within the 5 competencies or wheel components, you'll see kind of these arrows going around the wheel that are really allowing us to think about transformative, personalized, empowering, and culturally affirming principles circulating, again, outside of these 5 areas of attention and focus. So we're going to kind of go ahead and move into these now. And again, I welcome thoughts, comments, reactions in the chat box as we think through these a little bit more critically together today. Again, and kind of developing equitable spaces for our students and for our young people. So this one is a no-brainer, right? I think for a lot of us on the call, positive developmental relationships, right? Relationships matter, right? Relationships are so important in the work that we do, whether that's during the school day or extended school day time. And we think about the power that these have, in particular, for our students who maybe have been through adverse childhood experiences. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the ACEs, or even young people who've had just some toxic stress, or maybe just kind of chronic stress, we could say. What we see in the research is that having attachments with adults that are really focused on emotional caring and attachment create trust and support in learning and growth for our students. And so the wonderful thing, even if you look at neuroscience, it's amazing with our functional MRIs, is we're seeing the power of long-term relationships, even if it's 1 hour a week with a caring and trusted adult. We're actually seeing changes in the brain structure, believe it or not, because of neuroscience, because of something called neuroplasticity. So that is amazing, right? It's like, wow, our programming actually has the power to heal, to transform, when we're being really intentional about the relational piece, right? I know a lot of us are thinking about our numbers that we're trying to hit and our budgets and all the other things that go into our programming. I know myself too, right? That's kind of a big stressor sometimes, but thinking again about what are we really here to do, right? What are we really in service to? And that's our young people, right? That's our staff members. So really thinking about how are we really creating positive developmental relationships, again, that can provide ways for young people to feel motivated, to learn, to grow, and to have a sense of self-efficacy. So kind of keep that one bucket moving and our kind of holding that a little bit in our brains this morning as we move into the second tenet. And so they encourage us to think about, as we're designing equitable spaces, I think this is probably my favorite of the 5 I have to share. It's just environments they're naming that are filled with safety and belonging. So maybe thinking, kind of going back to our Brave Space poem, how are we creating senses of safety and belonging for our students that have different identities, right? For our staff members that have different identities, different lived experiences. Like, what does that really look like? Or like, what could we reimagine that to become? right, as we move along in this work. And so as we know, our young people feel and they learn their best when they have that physical and emotional safety. Certainly when their cultures are also represented and valued in their learning. And when they feel a sense of membership and connection to one another. So when we think about kind of unpacking this, anything that we're creating, right, that we can really think about shared values and routines is really helpful. Having high expectations of our students, absolutely. Communicating their worth, absolutely, right? And certainly really embracing and demonstrating cultural affirmation for our students. So this might be sparking different things for you right now of like, oh yeah, we've been doing this and this is how we've been doing it, right? Or maybe it's sparking for you, I wonder what that could look like. I wonder what else we could do to provide more senses of safety and belonging. I've heard one of our part-time staff, one of our teaching artists say kind of moving even from brave space to something like a sacred space, and how that happens when they have really focused on this tenet here, this kind of creating that sense of safety and belonging in their clubs. And so I invite us now to think about these first two buckets, right? In the chat, whatever's coming up for you, maybe how you focus right now in your programming on developing these positive relationships. Like, how have you done that? How have you been intentional in doing that for your students and for your staff? Or perhaps thinking a little bit more deeply about how you're creating environments that are filled with a sense of safety and a sense of belonging in your work. So I'm just going to give us all just a couple moments to pause and think a little bit about these two ideas, and allow us to, want to come on and share verbally. We love that always. Or if you want to go ahead and use the chat box, we love to hear about what's been happening for you and your work related to these two ideas. Marty,
I'll share.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
I'll share.
Awesome, thank you.
I think like check-ins really come in, clutch in terms of building positive relationships. The more that you really check in with someone, and it's not just like, how are you doing, and then just keep it moving. It's really like talking to them and seeing like what's happening in their life, or taking interest in something that they might like. I know when I was a program director, when I saw a kid wearing like a Spider-Man t-shirt, it's like, okay, I know they like Marvel, and I would try to like talk to them about Spider-Man or like an upcoming movie or something, so that we can like build more of them that just like, hi, how are you?
Right. Just that deeper engagement, I'm hearing that deeper connection, right? Building upon what they're into, what their interests are, and really cultivating something really special from that place, right? That's awesome. Thank you for that. Because our young people can tell, right? They can tell if that connection is a little bit more, dare we say, on the surface, right? So I love what you're sharing around really reaching for a deeper connection, really observing your young people, taking note of their what they're wearing, what they're rocking, what their style is, what their interests are, and being curious even to ask them and kind of keep building from that place, right? So thank you for that. I'm also seeing here in the chat box, again, like the daily checking in, seeing how the children are doing and feeling, right? Valuing, right, their life outside of that moment that you're with them. And also thinking that it's important to get to know a person, again, outside of the workspace, learning about their interests, their goals, their future plans, and how that really invites a deeper connection when we do that, right? Absolutely. And Robin, through the message you send, when you need to speak to them, make it clear it's a safe space with your words. Things like, I just need you to be honest with me so we can solve the problem. When you need to talk to mom and dad, tell them what you are doing and why, right? To counter that, talk to mom and dad about the good and the bad so that they know you recognize it and that you celebrate with their village, quote unquote. Thank you. I love what you're sharing there, Robin. And Marissa, it's not always easy or possible, but in my roles, I've been fortunate to be able to sit and chat one-on-one with students and really get to know them and who they identify as in relationship to peers, family, and their community. Marissa, that's beautiful. It's not always easy, you're right, but finding ways to really center that, relationship development, it sounds like you're finding ways to do that. And Monica, giving them their unique space and time and make it their own, right? And I think what we're talking about when we're thinking about transformative SEL and creating spaces, right? It's never going to be a one size fits all, right? It's not like that for adults. It's certainly not like that for our young people. So getting to learn their love language, right? Like what's really going to spark their engagement and their deeper learning in the spaces that we create. How do the spaces look? Right? Are they inviting? How are we situating and organizing things like chairs and desks when we're in person, right? Like, what does that look like and feel like? Are we sitting in circles, kind of inviting more relationship and more connection versus maybe rows of desks and chairs? And then thinking about, virtually, how are we creating welcoming and inviting virtual spaces using things like movement and music, using things like poetry or spoken word, or again, kind of building upon the interests of the group to really, again, promote that sense of safety and belonging. Like I can come like my full self and be definitely embraced here by this village at the Leadership Program or Boys and Girls Club, right? Depending on, of course, your place of employment. And Robin is sharing here as well. We have always told our staff there is no such thing as a bad child. And when a child is being challenging, we encourage them to ask why. I love that, as opposed to being reactive. That's right. It's kind of like an iceberg, right? Like we see the tip of the iceberg, that behavior, and being really curious about what's underneath that. Like when you think about an iceberg, right? Like it's a tiny little, maybe not so tiny, but there's a tip in the ocean, but underneath of that is such a large piece of ice. And there's so many different factors that have led to that moment, that behavior. So I love that, thinking about responding versus reacting. Also thinking about, who are our children? Thinking about even things like multiple intelligences, which was something coined, I think it was back in like the 80s by Howard Gardner, right? Really knowing the different beautiful strengths of your children, inquiring about what those are, and inviting them into this space can create those deeper moments of safety and connection. And certainly, we've been really conscious around invitations to share pronouns as well with our young people, and thinking again about culturally affirming language, gender affirming language in our clubs and our programs, and how we can begin to really center some of those ideas as well. So I love the conversation. Thanks everyone so much. I just want to invite you all just for a couple minutes here on your own accord, just to do some breathing, some stretching. If you want to turn your cameras off, send a quick text, send an email. We'll come back together in just a few moments. But I just want to kind of invite some body movement and break right now for all of you. Okay, so like 10:42, we'll come back together. I'm just going to roll my shoulders. My camera is on. But I know I slept kind of funky last night and my neck and shoulders are a little stiff today. So just again, giving yourself whatever you need right now. If it's moving, if it's just some breathing, go ahead and take some time for that. Okay, that works for us. But I hope you're able to do a little breathing, a little movement to kind of tend to yourself a little bit today. We're going to move now into thinking about, in our whole child design, how are we really consciously putting in rich learning opportunities and the development of knowledge in our work, right, in our programming. So thinking a little bit more deeply about that, our infographic that is an evidence-based from the Learning Institute really invites us to think about creating experiences that are both personally meaningful and intellectually challenging, right? So helping our young people to kind of build on prior knowledge as well as build like new skills, right? They're kind of within what they call that optimal zone or that proximal zone of development, if you will. And what we know from a lot of, educational research is thinking about young people are really most engaged when they are doing some sort of an activity with others, when they're collaborating with their peers. It allows them to really deepen knowledge and think about creating solutions to problems. And I know a lot of you are doing this work, have been doing this work in your programming for a long time. And this is, again, one of the things that we're thinking about as essential to providing equitable learning and extracurricular spaces for our children, for our young people. Again, that are both personally meaningful and intellectually challenging, right? And so before we jump ahead, I just wanted to kind of open that up for a moment if there was any thoughts or reactions to this particular competency, if you will. But again, chat box is great. If there's anything percolating or that folks are wanting to share, we welcome that. I think this has been a big push too, in terms of culturally responsive practices, right? Curriculum and lesson planning that our young people have personal connections to, right? Really understanding who's in the room, who are our students, and how we're really tailoring our instruction to invite that into the space, right? And that's probably a whole other workshop series that we can do or you've been to before in other spaces, but that I think is a really important component as well. But for time, we'll kind of move into our fourth tenet here, which is really looking at the development of skills, habits, and mindsets in our spaces, right? How are we really centering this as an overarching framework in the work that we're doing in our classrooms, in our clubs, even things like parent workshops or teacher workshops, staff meetings, right? Thinking about how does this also support in providing equitable design thinking? So what's shared here, and I know we've touched on a little bit of this in the previous sessions with Erica and with Elaine, specifically around growth mindset, but we're thinking again here, excuse me, about personal and social awareness that supports self-regulation and social skills, things like executive function skills, that support organization, and really being able to think about self-direction and habits that allow for young people to have resilience and perseverance, especially in moments of challenging times or whenever they're facing adversity. So what we know from the research is that these skills and habits and mindsets with really great content from your programming allows for these really great skills to develop, what are often kind of termed the 21st century skills. So things like collaboration, critical thinking skills, and problem solving. So my question for us today is to kind of unpack these two ideas a little bit further. What are some examples of rich learning experiences in your programs? Like what's happening? What do you want to kind of brag a little bit about today? What's going really well in this area? Or also like, how are your programs working to develop these growth mindsets or critical thinking skills? What are you really proud of? What's going what's exciting or what's on the horizon. We invite you all to kind of share, because whenever we hear different ideas, it can spark one another to kind of want to do some different things in our own programs. So I'm going to go ahead and pause myself here. And again, we can use the chat box, or if folks want to come on and share, if any of these questions are resonating for you, we welcome that. That's wonderful. Artie, thank you, from Boys and Girls Club, that we implement SEL and STEAM activities on a daily basis. That is fantastic. Definitely brag worthy, right? That's really wonderful. Thinking about that kind of continuum that you're creating, right? That intentionality for your young people. Thank you for sharing that. And I think after today, right, we're all really focusing on our SEL development curriculum, right? Really implementing that absolutely. I think kind of correlates to both of these questions. And thank you, Ashley. Social interactions and interpersonal skills with others are really being focused on. So I love that. It's kind of that social awareness that we've been talking about in this series, right? One of our main competencies of SEL, and being able to think about interactions and interpersonal skills, thinking about getting along with each other, what that means, who we are in the world, how we're similar and different. All of that is so important and will lead to really successful, right, young adults and older adults as they enter different spaces in different parts of their lives and their trajectories. It's wonderful. Are folks seeing this also for the adults within your organizations? Any of these tenets that are being developed around maybe in staff meetings or anything like that? I'm always curious to hear as well. Again, both young people, but also the adults who are implementing what's happening for the adults. Are they getting some of these important ideas and opportunities to really learn and grow together? Something that we talk a lot about at the leadership program in our own staff meetings too, is specifically habits and mindsets. Well, please keep thinking about that. Keep, leaning into that. For time, we're going to move into our next thought here around whole child design, expansive and inclusive spaces. And a big one for myself, I think, just with my background in mental health and as a social worker, is thinking about integrated support systems in our programs, right? Where wellness isn't just something that's like outside of club, right? Or is this social work office down the hallway with dim lighting and nobody wants to go knock on the door, really thinking about how are we including this in our program design to really meet our young people where they're at. So what we have here is thinking about in our learning settings, again, classrooms and after school spaces, how do we kind of provide or design some protective factors in those spaces? So the research mentions things such as tutoring, things such as mentoring, and thinking about how those elements can really enhance, again, what's shared here, engagement, can enhance achievements, and also really kind of a deeper sense of excitement and fulfillment in the learning, right? Much like SEL isn't just like a separate thing that we do, right? What I'm seeing in the chat box today, and just like last week, is that things like SEL is really integrated. It's kind of that overarching umbrella in our programs, right? If we don't have SEL as a part of our recipe for success, it's usually not going to go so well, right? We can't just kind of parcel out SEL from academics or SEL from our extended school day time. It's so interrelated. I think that's the word that's coming up for me, is that interconnection and that interrelatedness with things like SEL and now transformative SEL, right? But thinking again about even like a deepening, kind of going a little bit further. We think about mental health, right? When we think about the importance of young people, not just, again, right, surviving, but thriving and having wellness really centered, right? Being able to talk about emotional health, being able to have spaces and opportunities for students to really have maybe some informal mentoring, which can be kind of the back door to kind of more formalized mental health, especially with a trusted adult, right? That mentoring piece is, I've seen just be really impactful across organizations, especially in the after school space. And also things like tutoring as an additional opportunity, I guess, right, can be also very impactful and really meet the different needs of our students. So I'm just curious, I know some of our programs offer, social work interns or creative art therapists, or within that we have, right, our dance movement therapy and music therapy and art therapy. So I'm seeing more and more, I think especially since COVID, more funding and like more emphasis on wellness due to the exacerbation of things like depression and anxiety in adolescents, and some kind of chronic traumatic situations that are really impacting our young people. So thinking about integrated support systems, like, have you all seen this? Is that something that you're thinking about, talking about, hoping for when we're thinking about wellness for students or even wellness for adults, what that could look like when we think about designing our programming in spaces? I do understand oftentimes these come down to budgets and funding and contracts and things like that, which is very near and dear to my heart. But I am curious, are you all inspired by seeing some more of this within your own organizations, within your own schools? And we'll spend just a little bit of time maybe hearing from some of you regarding support systems for students. Does anyone have a mentoring program happening at your organization or at your school? Anything like that? I know I'm hearing more and more of that work happening, but I was just curious if some of you all were having those conversations as a one way to kind of support more of the wellness and goal setting with young people.
I'll chime in real quick if that's okay.
Oh, sure.
I mean, it takes a village, and I know that in a lot of the programs that I've worked with, it's like you find partners to cover all of those bases. I used to work for a tutoring and mentoring program, and I was in the shelter system, and it was about like finding other resources of how we can help these students and really creating collaborations with the community and other community-based organizations or nonprofits that could kind of fill in the gaps where we felt we couldn't meet the students' needs. So like it always takes a village, and this is something that I don't think any one organization can do, and if they can, that's incredible, and I'm jealous. But yeah, I mean, those are like the three things I would say that I think every organization wants to do, and we're trying to find different ways to do it within our budgets and within the means that we have.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, for just naming that reality. That resonates for me as well in the work that we're doing at the Leadership Program too, where it does take a village, right? It does take kind of mapping out your co-partners, your co-conspirators to really provide all of the resources, right? And understanding that it's not always possible just for one program or one organization, but how can we come together and make that happen? I know for ourselves, we're kind of trying to think outside the box and reimagine mentoring and thinking about the power, even of peer mentoring, as something where we might have more capacity to think through and design, beside, of course, our school administrators in the schools that we work within. So I appreciate you naming that, and think about how important that integrated support really is for our children, right? How much they benefit from having, extracurricular time, and then of course, a focus on wellness and academic supports. So it sounds like we have some great ideas that were just shared there on how you're integrating supports for students, trying to kind of find your thought partners, re-examine our budgets, right? Thinking about the power of partnership and collaboration to really begin to center wellness and, of course, academic needs as well. So thank you for sharing your ideas. If there's other thoughts on this, we certainly welcome those as well. I want to make sure we have a little bit of time coming up for just about maybe 10, 12 minutes in breakout groups towards the end of this session that we're finding ourselves in already. So as you saw, we just kind of went through again our wheel here on healthy development, learning, and thriving. That is really a roadmap for providing equitable learning design elements in any space. Again, this research is really thinking about the application of this across settings, from after school to classroom to even kind of school district level planning. So what I love about this is just the emphasis there on personalized, empowering, culturally affirming, and transformative elements for, again, designing new learning settings, and also for assessing just kind of where we are, thinking about our positive developmental relationships, doing a little bit of an organizational inquiry, right? Or audit, if you will. Like, how are we doing with this element? Thinking again about safety and belonging. How are we doing within that capacity, in terms of achieving more equitable spaces for our students and more inclusive spaces? Thinking again about learning experiences and knowledge development, moving into skills, habits, and mindsets that are culturally affirming. And then lastly, that we just touched upon, that integrated support system piece. How are we doing in terms of that element of design, if you will? And I wanted to share here that these are really critical for exposing and upending inequities across learning and developmental, ecosystems, again, from classrooms to after school to community-based programming. So my hope is that we can, now that you've heard me talk a bunch, you've heard from some of your fellow peers on the call and some great ideas in the chat box, just have a little bit of time together in breakouts, and Danny will be able to kind of whisk you away momentarily. And Danny, maybe we could do groups of like 4,
okay.
4 to 5 would be so great. And my hope is that you can all just kind of touch base a little bit and thinking about what's going really well for where you're at. How are you kind of maybe already doing some of this work? How's it being implemented? I know specifically safety and belonging is a kind of a hot topic that comes up a lot in these conversations on design, and how we're really working towards that to provide inclusion. And then also on the other end of the spectrum, what are the gaps that you might be seeing? What are some elements that could be worked on in your organization or your program, or could be expanded upon? Maybe you're already working to expand some different things, like we were talking a little bit about the integrated supports. So it's kind of up to you wherever the conversation may lead. And you'll spend, again, maybe about 12 minutes together, and then we'll come back for the final part of our time together. Thank you, Danny, for your help with the breakouts.
Got it. Okay, and how much time, Stoles?
About 12 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Time.
All right, and
Thank you.
it should be opening now. So you should see a pop-up. Please click the pop-up so that you can be whisked away to your room. If you're having a hard time seeing the pop-up, I believe you should be able to click more or the 3 dots, and I think you'll be able to join your breakout room. Hi, Andre. I know you just you connected with another device for the breakout room. Hi, Andre.
Hey, Andre.
Sorry. We're doing breakout rooms. Oh, you're muted. Okay. Oh, Andre, you're muted. Sorry.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Same issue as before.
Gotcha.
I'm looking on my computer, but y'all can hear me and see me on my phone.
Cool, cool. I remember it. I was like, oh, I think that's.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No
so
problem.
on the computer, you have me in breakout room 1, but yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you for reminding us.
Thank you.
No problem.
Welcome back. Hope you all had some time to connect there. Also, maybe send an email if you needed to, whatever. I know we're all juggling quite a lot these days. But I would love just to open up a little bit for a few moments. I know we don't have too much time left together. It's always so great to hear like what was happening, if there was any great ideas that were shared. So I would love to hear if there was anything that really inspired you today that you heard from a fellow participant on your call in terms of any of the design work happening in programming, right? At your schools, at your locations. What are those great things that we can really celebrate and feel inspired by? So I'm going to go ahead and allow folks to think about that, or if there's something that you want to share with all of us that you shared in your group that's been going really well. We welcome that, definitely. So just give a couple minutes here for folks to think through this question on inspiration in terms of equitable design. It's so important that we're thinking about, right, equity versus equality, right? We're thinking about fair access to opportunities, fair access to whatever is happening within our programming for all young people, right? Really considering, again, moving away from that one size fits all to really creating unique opportunities and design for engaging our students, right? So any thoughts or reactions on what's going well in this arena, or if maybe there's some other things that folks want to share that is more related to areas for growth moving forward, or what you might want to incorporate more of, right, in the work that you're doing. We welcome that as well. Absolutely. Thanks, Monica. Monica is sharing here that including the STEAM in our daily interaction with students and parents. That's really inspiring. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I'd love to hear how that works with parents. That sounds amazing. I'd love to learn more from you and kind of designing that approach, not just for students, but also for that other amazing stakeholder, which are families, right? Our parents. It's fantastic. Are there other ideas around how you all have been creating safety and belonging for students? I'd love to maybe spend a couple minutes on that specific bucket. What does that look like in your programming? How are you approaching that design element? I think we can always learn a lot from each other in that regard. I've been inspired by, some of our part-time teaching artists creating what they call circle of hands, which is one way to create community agreements in the beginning of program, really kind of having what do we want to be in this space and jotting those things down on the inside of the circle of hands. They're all kind of tracing their hand on the outside of newsprints going around. So on the inside is what do we want for our time together? What are our kind of agreements or our group norms? And then on the outside of the hands is kind of writing down what we don't want here, right? Things like disrespect, being able to kind of process and unpack those words with our young people, and then being able to kind of initial and decorate the hand depending on the age group that you're working with, right? Is one way that I've seen safety and belonging and hopefully kind of moving into more of a brave space. We started our time together today exploring kind of happen, through those different activities. But are there other thoughts on that, or different ideas or different strategies that you all are implementing? If not, that's okay. Oh, cool, Andre. Awesome, thank you. I have the kids in my program to come up with their own rules. That's beautiful, and to follow and hold themselves accountable on a daily basis. Thank you for sharing that. There's a lot of power there when it comes from our kids, right? That they're the ones naming and sharing the rules, their ideas, that it's not coming from us, the adult, right? We can guide and shift if we need to, or step in as they're creating them, but that's really amazing. Really student-led ideas, right? And that self-accountability and that group accountability to one another, I think, is really powerful as well, right? It sounds like there's a lot of co-partnership and co-creation that's happening in your program. So I love to hear that. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. It helps to give them ownership in their own program, and it helps the other kids hold their peers accountable. Absolutely. Kind of that self-governing, right? Where it's much more powerful and impactful if it's coming from their peers versus the adults in the space. So that's amazing. Ashley, thank you. Ashley is sharing that children in my program have input in our activity schedule. That is amazing. It gives them leadership development. Yes, and it invites, which we know is so much a part of culturally responsive practices, it really inviting the voice of our young people and the choices of our young people into the program design is really essential. So it sounds like you all are doing a great job of that. Thank you. Right, that sense of ownership. It's their choice, what's happening on that given day, or what they want to be a part of as well in any given day and moment. So that's awesome. It's all really great ideas. Yeah, Andre. Yep. It gives them a voice to be heard, as most kids aren't really heard. They're being told. That's right. A lot of being dictated to, directed, so that we're kind of flipping that on its head a little bit with some of these ideas, right? Allowing their voice to be really centered. It's that co-creation. I think that's really what I'm inspired by in our chat box today. So thank you for these great ideas. I think also, you know, that accountability piece is really powerful. As Andre was sharing there, like, what does that look like? How are young people holding themselves accountable when a harm does occur? What are the protocols for that? You know, we're seeing a lot of utilization of restorative practices in our programs, and I think that's really powerful too. Moving to repairing harm and moving towards healing, right? Not just kind of like punitive consequences that leave young people feeling really empty oftentimes, and really silenced oftentimes too. So really great ideas. In our final closing here, I just love to ask if there's any kind of final actions or commitments that you're hoping to follow up on after today's session. We'd love to hear those in the chat. And Andre is also sharing, I also model responsive classroom techniques, but modify it to my program. That is beautiful. So really thinking about what does that look like in motion, right? And bringing that into your work, into your programming is awesome. Really great ideas. I've learned a lot from all of you, and I hope that this framework that we kind of unpacked together might serve as a useful tool and roadmap as you all kind of move forward from here. Again, thank you for being here. Danny is going to drop a survey link in the chat box here. And if you're able also, if you haven't done so already, just your name and your organization in the chat. If you want to just do it one more time for attendance purposes, that way you're able to get credit for today. Feel free. And we have one final quote here, again, going back to the powerful sharings from Bettina Love in her book. Often people are waiting for a leader to come along. You don't have to wait for someone else. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and I hope that everyone is well and takes good care and has a great rest of the day. Almost a Friday, folks. We are almost there. So I hope the rest of your Thursday goes really smoothly. And you will definitely get a copy of the slides and any other comments or resources that you need. Feel free to reach out. I'll put my email here in the chat box, which is Stephanie@tlpnyc.com. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you all in different spaces moving forward. Thank you all so, so much.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Monica. You too. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.